Vanessa Coleman had learned to read a room before she even stepped into it. Years of navigating boardrooms where every glance, every pause, every offhand remark carried an unspoken judgment had sharpened that instinct to a fine edge. So when she stepped into the first-class cabin of Pacific Eagle Airlines' mid-morning flight from Dallas/Fort Worth to San Francisco, she noticed the shift almost immediately. The cabin smelled faintly of leather and brewed coffee, with a hint of citrus from the hot towels neatly folded on each seat. The seats themselves, wide cream-colored leather with navy piping, were spaced far enough apart to give the illusion of privacy. A suited businessman in 1C was already tapping furiously on his laptop. A woman in a pearl blazer adjusted her silk scarf without looking up. Vanessa paused for a brief second in the aisle, the handle of her carry-on resting lightly in her hand, before moving toward seat 2A. Her Ralph Lauren suit was tailored to perfection, the midnight blue fabric catching just enough light to look both professional and expensive, without screaming for attention. The Hermès scarf at her neck, a deep maroon patterned with gold chains, was a quiet nod to the life she had built for herself. Her black hair, swept back into a smooth chignon, framed the kind of face that made people curious, even if they couldn't quite place why. Emily Rhodes, the young flight attendant working the front cabin, greeted her with a bright smile. "Good morning, Ms. Coleman. Welcome aboard." Vanessa returned the smile. "Good morning." Emily stepped aside to let her pass, already noting that the passenger list showed Ms. Coleman was booked under a VIP flag designation. Emily had been briefed to offer extra courtesy to certain passengers, though no one explained why. As Vanessa settled into her seat, she opened her laptop and began reviewing the latest draft of the merger agreement between Coleman Strategy Group and Pacific Eagle Airlines. It was a deal months in the making. $3.8 billion worth of negotiations, legal wrangling, and whispered speculation in industry circles. If all went according to plan, the signing in San Francisco tomorrow would cement her company's position in the aviation sector in a way no one had anticipated when she started out. She was used to being underestimated. Her parents, both public school teachers in Houston, had taught her that excellence was the only way to push back against the low expectations that trailed her as a black woman in America. They hadn't had much money, but they had given her the kind of grounding that made her believe hard work and integrity could carry her farther than any private school pedigree. Those lessons had followed her through college at UT Austin, an MBA at Wharton, and the grueling years of building her own consultancy from a one-bedroom apartment into a firm with over 200 employees. Even so, in spaces like this, spaces dominated by an older, paler crowd, she could still feel the quiet calculation in other people's eyes. From the open cockpit door, Captain Richard "Rick" Harlan glanced back at the boarding passengers. He'd flown for Pacific Eagle for over 25 years, after more than a decade in the Air Force. His uniform was crisp, posture ramrod straight, silver hair perfectly trimmed. He saw himself as part of the old guard of aviation, men who'd been there before the diversity hires and quota systems started creeping in. His gaze landed on Vanessa in 2A, young, black, first class. His mouth tightened. He leaned toward Emily, who was arranging champagne flutes on a tray. "Check her boarding pass again," he said quietly, but with a tone that wasn't really a request. Emily hesitated. "I already did when she boarded, Captain. She's in 2A. "People end up in the wrong seats all the time. Just make sure," Harlan replied, turning back to the cockpit instruments as if the matter was settled. Emily's stomach tightened. She'd been on the job long enough to recognize the subtext, but she was also new enough to know what defying a captain could mean for her career. With reluctant steps, she approached Vanessa's seat. "Excuse me, Miss Coleman," Emily said softly, her voice tinged with apology. "Would you mind if I just re-verified your boarding pass?" Vanessa looked up from her laptop. She'd seen this dance before, more times than she could count. A flash of recognition passed through her eyes, but she kept her tone even. "Of course," she said, sliding the boarding pass from the side pocket of her purse and handing it over. Emily scanned it, cheeks flushing. "Thank you. You're all set." Vanessa gave her a small smile that somehow managed to be both gracious and knowing. "No problem." Emily returned to the galley, wishing she had the courage to ignore Harlan's instruction. The rest of the boarding process unfolded with the usual blend of polite greetings and quiet seat adjustments. Vanessa sipped a glass of water and mentally rehearsed her talking points for tomorrow's meeting. She was aware of the occasional glance from other passengers, most of them the kind of people who traveled this route regularly for business. Middle-aged men in suits, a few women with designer handbags, and a scattering of tech workers heading to Silicon Valley. She thought of Marcus, still in the airport lounge wrapping up a video call with investors in Tokyo. They'd planned to fly together, but business had a way of rearranging their schedules. Still, she smiled at the thought that in just a few hours they'd be on the ground in San Francisco, ready to close a deal that would make them part owners of the very airline she was flying. From the cockpit, Harlan emerged briefly, a tight smile on his face as he greeted passengers in the front row. When he reached Vanessa, he paused. "First time in first class?" he asked, his tone light but edged with condescension. Vanessa met his gaze. "No, I fly this route twice a month." Harlan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, enjoy the experience." He moved on before she could respond, leaving a faint chill in the air. Vanessa took a slow breath and returned to her laptop. She had learned long ago to file away these moments without letting them derail her focus. But she also knew, deep down, that sometimes moments like these didn't stay small. Sometimes they became the spark that lit an entire fire. Vanessa slid the laptop a few inches back, letting her eyes track the slow choreography of boarding. Gate agents exchanged practiced nods. The soft chime of the jet bridge door opening and closing was a metronome for the morning. Out the oval window, a ground crew in neon vests moved with quiet efficiency, the pushback tug idling like a patient ox. Emily returned with a tray of pre-departure drinks, her smile professional and a little apologetic, as if she wished she could rewind a minute and make the unnecessary recheck not happen at all. "Water with lemon, ginger ale, or champagne?" she asked. "Water's perfect," Vanessa said. "Thank you." Emily set the glass down on a cocktail napkin embossed with Pacific Eagle's midnight blue logo. "If you need anything, truly, just press the call button. We're here." There was something sincere in the way she said it that made Vanessa's shoulders drop a fraction. "I appreciate it," Vanessa replied. "Hey, quick question. The snack mix. Do you happen to know if there's any strawberry in anything? I have a pretty severe allergy." "Oh, yes," Emily said, immediately alert. "We don't serve anything strawberry in first, and the nuts are almond-based. But I'll double-check the ingredient sheet for cross-contamination notes." "Thanks. I know it's fussy." "It's not fussy," Emily said, a firmness slipping through her polite cadence. "It's your health." Vanessa smiled. Small moments of decency were still moments, and they helped. Across the aisle, a man in 2C glanced up from his phone, his eyes flicking from Vanessa's face to her scarf to the open spreadsheet on her screen. Not hostile, just curious. She'd lived long enough with curiosity to know the difference between a question mark and a period. His gaze softened when he saw the spreadsheet headings: cost synergies, fleet optimization scenarios, training center capex, and he gave the smallest of nods, the universal language of business travelers, acknowledging another who spoke the dialect. Vanessa thought of Marcus again, how he would have teased her about opening the model before takeoff. "Give yourself 10 minutes to just be a person, V," he told her the night before, tossing a soft hoodie at her as he packed. "You can save an airline and relax at the same time." She'd rolled her eyes and kissed him and said something about time zones and investor calls. Still, the thought warmed her now. They had both come up the long way, him from a family-owned auto shop in Shreveport, her from classrooms with flickering fluorescent lights and outdated textbooks, and built something that looked, from a distance, like inevitability. Up close, it was held together by late nights and careful planning and the kind of stubborn hope you only learn by needing it. A couple in the front row settled into their seats, the woman tucking a paperback into the side pocket, the man asking for black coffee even though the cabin hadn't closed yet. A young woman with a sleek backpack paused near 3D, texting rapidly with both thumbs, then sat down and exhaled like she'd been sprinting. The cabin was a quilt of small lives, stitched together for a few hours by altitude and shared air. The intercom crackled. "Good morning, folks," a crisp voice said. "We are continuing to board for our non-stop service to San Francisco. If you're in need of assistance, our gate agents would be happy to help. We'll be underway shortly." Vanessa took a sip of water and drew a breath that tasted faintly of lemon. She pulled up her notes for tomorrow's agenda. Open with appreciation. Pivot to accountability. Set expectations about culture. The numbers mattered. Of course they did. But so did the signal a merger sent. People watched what you counted and what you refused to count. "Here you go," Emily said softly, returning with a laminated card. No strawberry anywhere near the snack prep. The dessert sauce option later is raspberry. We can skip it or sub-honey if you prefer. "Honey's great," Vanessa said. "Thank you for checking." A shadow fell across the aisle and then moved on. Captain Harlan made another pass through first class, the corners of his smile sharp as paper. He stopped to shake hands in 1A, clapped a shoulder in 1C, and when his eyes grazed 2A, the smile tightened into something that wasn't quite a smile at all. He kept walking. Emily's jaw set the tiniest bit. Vanessa focused on her screen, but the awareness of him lingered like a draft in a sealed room. She'd sat with this feeling before, in banks and law firms and private clubs, in places where she was both perfectly allowed and somehow still in question. It wasn't always about what was said. Most days, it was about the invisible ledger some people kept, tallying how much space you took up. A family with matching carry-ons rolled past toward economy. The little boy peered into first class with unabashed interest. Vanessa waved. He grinned and waved back until his mother gently steered him on. Vanessa's chest loosened. It was amazing how quickly a child could rearrange the air in a room. Her phone buzzed on the armrest. A text from Marcus, Gate C-17, still wrangling Tokyo. "I'll make it. Don't let them pour you the weird, sparkling water." M. She smirked and typed back. "Already told them I only drink cinnamon-scented rainwater harvested at altitude. Hurry." V. 3 dots pulsed, then stopped. Typical. He'd be back on in a minute, probably mid-sentence to a fund manager who had never been told no. Out on the tarmac, a Southwest jet lumbered past in livery that looked almost cheerful against the wide North Texas sky. Inside, the light shifted a degree warmer. A cloud moved, or maybe the cabin lights adjusted. Time bent a little, the way it always did during boarding. Hurry up and wait, 100 people trying not to think about where they had to be after this. The young woman in 3D, sleek backpack, glanced toward the cockpit, then toward Vanessa, then down at her phone. Her expression had the alertness of someone who had learned to pay attention when the air changed. Vanessa noticed, filed it away, returned to her model. Rows of numbers steadied her. There was something blessedly literal about a balance sheet. No insinuations, no subtext. Just what was and what wasn't, what added up and what didn't. Tomorrow would be about more than numbers. But the numbers would set the frame, and she knew how to build a frame that could hold weight. A soft trill announced the closing of the forward door. Emily began a quiet circuit, checking seatbelts and carry-ons, answering last-minute questions about Wi-Fi and meal choices. She reached 2A and paused. "We'll push in a few minutes," Emily said. "If your travel partner hasn't boarded, he should be on shortly. We have a manifest note." Vanessa nodded. "He's on his way." Emily hesitated, then lowered her voice. "If anything feels off, please ring. I mean it." Vanessa dipped her chin. "I will." Emily moved on. The cabin hushed to that anticipatory stillness that always came right before the safety demo, a brief truce between ground and sky. Vanessa closed the laptop, smoothing the cover as if to press the ideas inside into neat compliance. She slid it into the seat pocket, took another sip of lemon water, and let her gaze blur on the stitched seam of the seat back in front of her. A memory unspooled without asking permission. Her mother at the kitchen table in their small Houston apartment, grading papers with a red pen gone dry, saying, "Hold your head up, Ness. There are places you'll walk into where people will forget they invited you. Don't forget." "I won't," Vanessa had promised at 12, not understanding how expensive that vow would sometimes feel. She breathed out slowly. The vow had held. It would hold today. From the cockpit, the faint click of switches. A murmur. The kind of technical language that meant nothing to most passengers, and everything to the two people in the front who would take them up and bring them down again. Vanessa closed her eyes for a second and pictured the route, west and a little north, over plains that would dry to gold by summer, over mountain ribs that still hid winter in their shadows, down into the patchwork of the bay. Her phone buzzed once more. "On my way down the jet bridge. Save me the cinnamon rainwater. M." She smiled before she could stop herself, the smile settling into the corners of her mouth like it had been waiting there. A soft thud as the last carry-on found a home. The gate agent's voice filtered in from the crack by the forward door. "That's the last of them." The door withdrew with a hydraulic sigh. The plane was a world now, contained and provisional. Emily stepped into the galley to secure the glassware. As she reached for the latch, a shadow filled the space beside her. Captain Harlan stood at the edge of the galley, just inside the line where passengers could see but not overhear easily unless they were listening for it. His voice, when he spoke, was pitched to carry only to Emily, or that was probably his intention. He jerked his chin toward 2A. "Make sure she belongs up here. Get that monkey back to coach where she belongs." The words slid through the air like a blade, so sharp and out of place that for a heartbeat Vanessa wondered if she'd misheard. The first-class cabin was quiet except for the rustle of safety cards and the occasional click of a seatbelt. The phrase landed in that stillness with the weight of something ugly that could not be taken back. She didn't move right away. Years of boardroom survival had trained her to pause, assess, let the heat pass before making a choice. But this wasn't a conference table. This was a narrow cabin, 30,000 feet in potential, and the insult had been spoken by the man in command of it. Her gaze shifted toward the source. Captain Harlan stood just inside the cockpit doorway, angled toward Emily in the galley. His voice hadn't been loud, but it had carried, deliberately, Vanessa thought, to be overheard without the accountability of direct address. A couple of passengers froze mid-motion. One man's fingers hovered over his phone screen before he slowly, deliberately tapped the camera icon. Emily's face drained of color. She glanced at Vanessa, then back at Harlan, her lips parting as if to say something and then closing again. The young attendant took a breath, stepped forward, and tried for a neutral tone. "Captain, I've already checked Ms. Coleman's ticket." "I'm not talking about tickets," Harlan said, his eyes on the coffee pot, as if the conversation were about nothing more consequential than beverage service. "Some people just don't fit in certain cabins, that's all I'm saying." It wasn't all he was saying, and everyone in earshot knew it. Jasmine Carter, seated in 2B beside Vanessa, turned her head slowly. She was a tall, poised woman in her 40s with a leather tote at her feet, and the kind of gaze that could make opposing counsel wish they'd called in sick. Her law practice specialized in employment discrimination cases. She didn't miss subtext for a living. "Excuse me," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "I believe we all heard what you just said. Would you like to clarify for the record?" Harlan's eyes flicked to her, then back to the cockpit. "Nothing to clarify, ma'am." Vanessa felt the familiar heat crawl up the back of her neck. She had promised herself, after a dozen too many such moments in her early career, that she would not let anyone decide the scale of her dignity for her. She placed her water glass on the armrest, stood, and stepped into the aisle just enough to be seen. "Captain?" she said, her tone even but carrying. I'd like to know what you meant by that comment. A hush spread through the cabin. Even the businessman in 1C closed his laptop an inch. Harlan didn't turn fully toward her. I meant exactly what I said, ma'am. First class isn't for everyone. That's interesting, Vanessa said, because I was under the impression that first class is for ticketed passengers who paid for their seats, and I meet both of those qualifications. Jasmine's eyes sparked. And as a reminder, Captain, discriminatory statements in the course of your professional duties can be grounds for, well, a number of consequences. Harlan's jaw tightened. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you, Jasmine replied. As an attorney, I find it's best to be clear. The man in 3D, the one with the sleek backpack from earlier, angled her phone just so. The tiny red light by the camera lens winked in the corner of Vanessa's vision. Others were watching, recording. Emily shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between chain of command and basic decency. Miss Coleman, she said softly, can I get you something else to drink? Vanessa shook her head. What I need, she said, her eyes still on Harlan, is for the captain of this aircraft to either repeat his statement loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear, or to apologize for it. A beat of silence. Somewhere behind them, a boarding passenger paused mid-step, sensing that they'd walked into a scene already in motion. Instead of an answer, Harlan muttered something indistinct and turned back toward the cockpit. The gesture was meant to dismiss her, to frame the incident as too trivial for further notice, but the air in the cabin had shifted. The businessman in 1C looked pointedly at Vanessa and gave a small nod. The woman in 1A pressed her lips together and shook her head slightly. Jasmine reached for her tote and slid it open, revealing a legal pad and pen. Some what, Captain? The voice came from the aisle behind them, deep and resonant enough to carry over the low murmur of passengers. Vanessa turned before she even fully registered the sound. Marcus Coleman stood there, one hand on the seat back, the other still holding his phone from whatever call he'd ended moments ago. His expression was calm, but his eyes held the kind of steadiness that meant someone was about to start asking the right questions. Marcus took a single step forward, and the aisle seemed to contract around him. He was tall enough that his head nearly brushed the overhead bin, broad-shouldered in a charcoal suit that looked effortless but was cut to command. Somewhat, Captain, he repeated, his tone still polite, but there was steel under it. Harlan turned halfway, his hand still on the cockpit doorframe. Sir, this is a private matter between myself and a passenger. Marcus's brow lifted. You made it public when you said it loud enough for others to hear. So I'll ask again, somewhat? The recording phones angled higher. In the corner of Vanessa's eye, Jasmine had clicked her pen. Emily shifted her weight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as if to hold back the words she wanted to say. I think you're misinterpreting, Harlan said finally, the syllables clipped. I was simply making an observation. About my wife? Marcus asked, his voice still level. That landed like a small detonation in the cabin. Heads turned. Even the young man in 2C, who had been studiously avoiding eye contact, looked up sharply. Harlan's mouth opened, then closed. Sir, I wasn't aware. You weren't aware, but you felt comfortable making a comment like that to a member of your crew? Marcus cut in. Tell me, Captain, is this how you address all passengers, or just the black ones? The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop a degree. Vanessa, standing now fully in the aisle beside Jasmine, felt the shift in the passengers around them, attention sharpening, breaths held. Harlan's eyes darted to the faces watching him, then back to Marcus. Look, I don't have to explain myself to— Yes, Marcus interrupted quietly, you do. It wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. The way he said it made explanation not a request, but an inevitability. Emily finally stepped in, her voice careful but clear. Captain, several passengers, including myself, heard your remark. It was unprofessional and inappropriate. Harlan's jaw flexed. Emily? No, Captain, she said, her tone firming. You asked me to recheck her ticket when you knew she was in the correct seat. You interrupted my service to comment on her allergy request, and then you said, well, you know what you said. I don't want to be part of this. A ripple of murmurs moved through the cabin. The man in 3D lowered his phone for a moment, just long enough to mutter to the woman beside him, "This is going viral in 10 minutes. Marcus took a step closer. "Captain, I'm giving you one chance to apologize to my wife. Right now, in front of everyone you tried to humiliate." Harlan glanced toward the cockpit, as if weighing whether to retreat entirely. "I think it's best we de-escalate this conversation," he said, his voice losing some of its earlier authority. Jasmine tapped her pen against the pad. Translation: You don't want to be recorded apologizing, which is fine. We can always do this later, in front of a judge. The captain's gaze flicked between Jasmine, Marcus, and Vanessa, calculating. "Fine," he said finally, the word grudging. "Ms. Coleman, if I offended you, that wasn't my intention." Vanessa's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's not an apology." "It's the only one you're getting," Harlan said, the corner of his mouth twitching as if he'd just won a point. Marcus tilted his head, studying him like a chess piece about to be removed from the board. Noted. Vanessa stepped back into her seat, her movements deliberate, refusing to rush as if to signal the matter was over. It wasn't. The low hum of conversation resumed in patches, but the current running under it was different now, charged, watchful. Marcus stayed standing a beat longer, his eyes on Harlan's retreating back. He didn't speak until the cockpit door clicked shut, then he leaned slightly toward Vanessa. "We'll talk after takeoff," he said quietly, "but we're not letting this slide." Vanessa gave the smallest of nods. "I know." Behind them, Jasmine was already scribbling something across the top of her legal pad, the words "witness list" clear enough for Vanessa to read upside down. Emily moved through the aisle again, offering drinks in a voice just a shade too bright, as if trying to stitch the moment back into something resembling normal. The safety video began to play on the screens, cheerful animated figures buckling seatbelts and pointing toward exits. It felt almost surreal against the residue of what had just happened. Marcus slipped into the seat across the aisle, still watching the cockpit door as if it might open again. He checked his phone, thumbed out a message, then glanced at Vanessa. She could feel the question in his eyes, unspoken. "You okay?" She answered it with the smallest of smiles, not reassurance exactly, but a signal that she was steady. For now. The chime for final cabin secure sounded. The plane's nose dipped slightly as the pushback tug began to roll them away from the gate. In 3D, the phone camera's red light winked off. "Got the whole thing," the passenger murmured to his seatmate. "This is going straight to Twitter." Vanessa settled her shoulders against the seatback, the hum of the engines building beneath her feet. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Marcus lean back too, but his jaw was set. The captain's voice came over the intercom for the pre-takeoff greeting. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." Marcus's eyes narrowed. He didn't look at Vanessa, but his voice was low enough for her to hear over the rumble. "We're not stopping here." Marcus Coleman had the kind of composure that could settle a room, or in this case, unsettle it completely. Even sitting now in 2C, his long frame relaxed against the seat, there was an unmistakable alertness in him. His dark eyes kept sliding to the cockpit door as if it were a piece of evidence that might try to walk away. The engine's hum deepened as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Outside, the spring light in Dallas was crisp, making the tarmac shimmer like polished steel. Inside, the cabin seemed to be holding its breath. Vanessa closed her laptop again, not because she couldn't work, but because she wanted her full attention on what was about to unfold. She'd seen Marcus in deal mode before, but rarely in public. When it happened, people tended to remember it. Jasmine Carter leaned across the aisle slightly. "You two flying together for business or pleasure?" she asked, her tone wry. Marcus's mouth ticked up at one corner. "Both," he said, "though this leg just got a lot more business than we planned." Emily came through for final checks, but her pace slowed as she neared 2A and 2C. "We'll be in the air in just a few minutes," she murmured. "If there's anything you need—" Marcus gave her a steady look. "There will be, soon." She swallowed and moved on. The plane lifted smoothly off the runway, the city flattening beneath them. As soon as the seatbelt sign chimed off, Marcus unbuckled, stood, and reached into the overhead bin for his phone. Not for email, but for a call he had already decided to make. He walked to the galley where Emily was securing the coffee pots. "Could you let the captain know I'd like a word?" Emily hesitated. "Sir, the cockpit—" "I know," Marcus said, voice calm. "Tell him Marcus Coleman needs 2 minutes of his time. He'll want to take the call." Something in the certainty of his tone made her nod without further protest. She disappeared toward the front. When she returned, her expression was a strange mix of curiosity and apprehension. "He says, fine, 2 minutes." Marcus stepped into the small space just outside the cockpit door. Harlan's face was a controlled mask, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed recognition, of Marcus's name if not his face. "This isn't the time or place," Harlan said. "Oh, it's exactly the time and place," Marcus replied. "What you said to my wife was not only racist, it was a liability to this airline, and since you're still in uniform, I'm going to handle it the way I handle any business risk. Immediately." Harlan's nostrils flared. "You think you can walk in here and—" "I'm not thinking," Marcus said. "I'm telling." He held up the phone, already on a call. "Bob Langford, CEO's on the line." Harlan blinked. "What?" On speaker, a crisp voice said, "Rick, it's Bob. I just had Marcus Coleman call me from your flight. You want to tell me why passengers are already sending me video of you making racist comments in first class?" Harlan's jaw worked, but no sound came out. "I'll save you the trouble," Bob continued. "You're relieved of duty effective immediately. Anthony Miles will meet the flight in San Francisco to take over your roster until we can fill the slot. You will not operate another Pacific Eagle aircraft. HR will be in touch about separation terms." "That's... Bob, you can't just—" "I can, and I did," Langford cut in. "Marcus and Vanessa Coleman are finalizing a multi-billion-dollar merger with us tomorrow, and even if they weren't, this behavior is unacceptable. Disembark at the next safe opportunity." The line went dead. For a long moment, the only sound was the muted rumble of the engines. Harlan looked from Marcus to the closed cockpit door. "You have no idea what you're—" "Oh, I do," Marcus said. "I'm making sure the culture of this airline changes starting now. You're just the first step." Marcus turned without waiting for a reply and returned to his seat. The ripple of whispers followed him down the aisle. Vanessa met his eyes as he sat. "Quick work," she murmured. "Not done," Marcus said. Emily approached cautiously. "Is he—" "Done," Marcus confirmed. "But that's not the problem we're here to solve." Jasmine leaned in from 2B. "If you two are about to take on Pacific Eagle's leadership, I'd very much like to help." Vanessa smiled faintly. "You may get your chance sooner than you think." The rest of the flight was a strange mix of normal and not. Coffee poured, seatbacks reclined, the murmur of conversation layered over the knowledge that the man who had insulted a passenger was now a passenger himself, sitting silently in the jump seat until they landed. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Marcus glanced at Vanessa. "After we get to the hotel, we set the terms. This isn't about one captain. It's about the system that let him think it was fine." Vanessa nodded. "And if they don't agree?" "Then they don't get the deal," Marcus said simply. The wheels kissed the runway. In the cabin stillness, that sounded almost like a starting gun. Langford's silence on the other end of the line stretched just long enough for the city outside to bleed from blue to black. Through the open hotel window, Vanessa could hear the faint clang of a cable car bell, the low engine hum of a delivery truck, a laugh from someone walking past below. The normal world went on, oblivious to the fact that a corporate giant was teetering on the edge of a decision that could redefine it. "All right," Langford said finally, voice lower than it had been in the boardroom. "We'll have a vote tonight. I can't promise unanimity, but I'll get you the majority you need." "You know what's on the table," Marcus replied. "Independent audit, oversight committee with real authority, compensation fund with independent administration, none of it watered down." "I know," Langford said, "and I know what happens if we don't move." The line clicked off. For the next 2 hours, the suite became a quiet war room. Jasmine spread out her laptop and wireless keyboard on the coffee table, refining language for the public announcement. James Washington paced near the window, fielding calls from their own board members, making sure no one on their side would flinch when the pressure came. Vanessa sat at the desk, phone pressed to her ear as she spoke to one of the audit firms they'd shortlisted, setting up a provisional agreement so the name could be in tomorrow's press release if Pacific Eagle agreed. At 10:43 p.m., Langford called back. "It passed," he said. Relief and exhaustion braided in his tone. 6-3. Winters voted no. 2 abstained. Everyone else is in. "Then we're in," Marcus said. "You'll have the signed resolution by morning," Langford promised. "We'll stand with you at the podium." When Marcus hung up, Jasmine let out a breath she'd been holding for an hour. "We've got about 8 hours to make sure the rollout doesn't look like spin." "It won't," Vanessa said. "We're not selling them a story. We're telling them what's going to happen." The next morning, the boardroom at Pacific Eagle's headquarters looked different. Not physically. The blinds still sliced the bay into pale gold strips. The coffee still steamed in white mugs, but in the way the people occupied it. Linda Grayson sat near Langford, legal pad open but untouched. Winters was absent, his seat left conspicuously empty. Adams had the final draft resolution in front of her, marked with signatures. At exactly 9 o'clock, the Colemans, Langford, Linda, Adams, and Daniel from PR stepped into the press room 2 floors down. It wasn't large, but every seat was filled. Reporters from national outlets, industry bloggers, a few local TV crews. The Pacific Eagle logo filled the backdrop behind the podium. Langford opened. His voice was steady, though his hand gripped the sides of the podium a little too tightly. He acknowledged the incident on Flight 482. "That violated our values and the trust of our customers," named Captain Harlan's termination, and then pivoted. "Today, with the partnership of Marcus and Vanessa Coleman, we are announcing structural changes that will ensure our airline lives up to the standards we claim." He laid them out one by one. An independent audit of all discrimination and harassment complaints from the past decade conducted by Harper & Bloom, LLP. A standing oversight committee with the power to review and intervene in HR decisions, including 2 outside members, one of whom would be Linda Grayson. A compensation fund for employees and customers harmed by documented misconduct, administered by an outside firm. When Langford stepped back, Marcus took the mic. "This isn't charity. It's not optics. It's course correction. We're investing in a culture that keeps the people who make an airline worth flying and holds accountable the people who threaten that." Vanessa spoke last. She didn't mention the plane or the slur or the hours in the boardroom. She talked about flying as a promise, that you would be carried safely from one place to another and treated with dignity along the way. "A good airline doesn't just get you there," she said. "It makes you want to come back." The questions came fast. Legal exposure, shareholder reaction, the cost of the fund. Marcus and Langford fielded them without evasion. Jasmine kept notes for follow-up. Daniel made sure every camera caught Linda's name when it was mentioned. By the time they stepped off the podium, the hashtags #Pacific Eagle Audit and #Changing Course were already climbing. Reporters were tweeting quotes before they even left the building. Back upstairs, the resolution was signed in a small, plain conference room. No photographers, just the people who had to put ink to paper. Adams handed out pens, the click and scratch of signatures loud in the quiet. Langford signed last. "It's done," he said, leaning back. "No," Linda corrected gently. "It started." That afternoon, an internal memo went out to all Pacific Eagle employees. It didn't read like legal boilerplate. It read like an acknowledgement of what had been allowed, of what wouldn't be tolerated anymore, of what the company owed its people. Screenshots began appearing on social media within minutes, with comments from current and former staff that ranged from cautious optimism to outright gratitude. In the Fairmont suite, Vanessa read a message from the young woman in scheduling they'd met on the sidewalk. "It's all over Slack. People are hopeful. It's been a long time since I've seen that here." Vanessa typed back, "Hold them to it." By evening, the Colemans were on a flight back east, not on Pacific Eagle. Not yet. They sat in business class on a competitor airline, not talking much, just letting the altitude carry the fatigue out of their shoulders. Marcus glanced at her over his glass of water. "You realize," he said, "we just rewired a company in 48 hours. "We gave them the tools," Vanessa said. "They'll have to use them." The plane leveled off. Below, the country unfolded in dark and light, rivers of headlights tracing highways. In the cabin, the air was quiet, the hum steady. Vanessa thought of Linda's voice in the boardroom, of Langford's fingers tight on the podium, of the message from the scheduler. She thought of the boy who had waved from economy on Flight 482, and she thought, sometimes you don't get to choose the fight. You only get to choose whether you show up for it. She reached for Marcus's hand. He closed his around hers without looking, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The San Francisco Bay in autumn was a different kind of beautiful, less sparkle, more substance. The fog came in lower, moving like thought across the water, and the air had that clean, salt edge that made you breathe deeper without realizing it. Vanessa stood by the tall window in Pacific Eagle's headquarters, looking down at the piers. Ferries moved in slow diagonals. A tugboat pushed a loaded barge toward the bridge. Somewhere in the city below, the streets were filling with the afternoon rush, but up here, the boardroom felt almost still. 6 months had passed since the vote. The independent audit was more than halfway through its 10-year sweep, and already its interim reports had teeth, patterns named, departments flagged, training programs restructured from the ground up. The Oversight Committee met twice a month, and Linda Grayson had become its quiet compass, steady enough to keep it from becoming window dressing. The Compensation Fund had paid its first claims in August. Some were small, covering therapy costs for a former flight attendant who'd been harassed out of her job. Some were larger, settlements with pilots whose promotions had been derailed by bias, now given back pay and seniority adjustments. Each check was a line in a story that was finally being told without footnotes or spin. And something else had happened, the thing Vanessa had hoped for but hadn't dared predict. Other airlines had called. First cautiously to learn about the process, then openly to ask if Harper & Bloom could take them on next. It was like watching the first row of dominoes fall and realizing the pattern stretched farther than you'd thought. Behind her, the boardroom door opened. Marcus walked in, phone in hand. "That was Delta's GC," he said. "They're looking at creating their own oversight body. They want Linda to consult." Vanessa smiled. "She'll be impossible to book for lunch now." "She's already impossible," Marcus said, grinning. He joined her at the window, his reflection aligning with hers in the glass. "Remember what you said on the plane, about not letting it slide?" "I remember you saying it," she said. "Close enough." They stood for a moment, not talking, watching the tide push against the docks. 6 months ago, this view had been a backdrop to crisis. Now it felt like a marker of change, unfinished, imperfect, but real. Later that afternoon, they toured the renovated crew training center, where the old posters about professional conduct had once hung like polite wallpaper. There were now clear, blunt guidelines and photos of actual Pacific Eagle staff smiling in their uniforms. The simulator bays were full. In one corner, a group of new hires was role-playing scenarios with trainers, learning not just the mechanics of service, but the boundaries of respect. Emily was there. She'd been promoted to lead trainer for in-flight staff, and when she spotted them, she crossed the room with that same bright energy she'd used to steady the cabin on Flight 482. "I owe you both coffee," she said. "We'll take it," Vanessa replied. Emily told them about the new reporting channels, anonymous, accessible from any device, monitored by an independent team. "It's not perfect yet," she admitted, "but people actually use it, and they get answers." Marcus nodded. "That's how you keep it from going back." That evening, Vanessa called her mother from the hotel. The video feed lit up with a familiar living room, soft lamplight, a quilt folded on the back of the couch. "Look at you," her mother said, smiling. "You're glowing." "Bay light," Vanessa said, though she knew it was more than that. Her mother listened as she described the changes, the way staff talked differently now, the letters from customers who noticed. When Vanessa finished, her mother was quiet for a beat. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "Not just for winning, for staying." Vanessa felt the words settle in her chest. "I had help," she said. "Smart woman," her mother replied. On their last day in the city, Marcus and Vanessa walked along the Embarcadero. The air smelled of salt and bread from a bakery they passed, the kind of mix that made you think about staying longer than you planned. Near Pier 7, a young man in a Pacific Eagle jacket stopped them. "You're the Colemans, right?" he asked, a little breathless. "That's us," Marcus said. The man's grin was quick and genuine. "I'm starting as a first officer next month. I wanted to say thanks. I know I wouldn't even be in the running if some things hadn't changed." Vanessa shook his hand. "Make the most of it, and make it better for the next one." As they walked on, Marcus glanced at her. "That's going to keep happening, you know." "I hope so," she said. That night, back in their suite, Vanessa packed slowly. Through the window, the city lights made the bay look like a scatter of coins. She thought about the past half year, the boardroom, the audit reports, Linda's steady voice, Emily's promotion, the young pilot's grin. She also thought about the flight still to take, the system still to change, the places where silence still covered the shape of harm. Change was like flying. You never really landed for good. You just touched down long enough to take off again. Marcus zipped his bag and looked over. "Ready?" "Always," she said, and she meant it. The next morning, their car pulled away from the curb. The city receded, the bridge rising in the distance. Somewhere out there, another flight was boarding, another cabin crew checking seatbelts, another passenger sliding into a seat with their own quiet history. And maybe, because of what had happened here, what had changed here, that passenger would be treated as exactly who they were, someone who belonged. There's a certain stillness that comes after a storm. Not the kind you hear on the news, but the kind you carry inside. I've seen enough seasons to know that sometimes the fiercest changes don't arrive with thunderclaps. They arrive in the quiet resolve of people who decide they will no longer be moved from what is right. Watching this story unfold, I thought of the many journeys I've seen in my lifetime, from dusty bus stations in the South to glass-walled boardrooms on the coast, and how the faces may change, but the fight for dignity in the Black community carries the same heartbeat. In those final moments, as autumn lights settled over the bay, it wasn't just about a merger or a policy. It was about the courage to name the wrong, the patience to see it through, and the wisdom to build something better from the broken pieces. That's the part the world doesn't always understand. That justice is not only about punishing what was done, but about making room for what ought to be. And for the Black community, and anyone who has carried the weight of being underestimated, these moments aren't just victories on paper. They're small restorations of the truth we've known all along. The heart of it is simple, though it's never easy. Hold your ground with dignity. Speak the truth without letting bitterness become your compass. When you defend what's right in a way that leaves the door open for change, you don't just reclaim your own story. You help write a better one for those who will come after. I've lived long enough to see how the smallest gesture, when done with integrity, can ripple farther than any of us imagine. Like a steady lamp as a window on a cold night, the light may seem small to the one holding it, but to the traveler outside, it can be the difference between feeling lost and finding the road home. I've walked through towns where a kind word could soften years of hardness, and I've watched the Black community come together to lift someone who thought they were standing alone. Those are the pictures that stay with you long after the headlines fade. The proof that even in a fractured world, connection is still our best defense against the dark. So take a breath, wherever you are tonight, and think about the times you've judged too quickly, or been judged in turn. Let this be a gentle reminder that truth and justice can come from the places we least expect, and from the people some might overlook. If this story has stirred something in you, let it be the start of a quiet commitment to see others fully, to speak when silence is a lie, and to carry your own small light where it's most needed. And if it's touched your heart, maybe pass a little of that warmth along to someone who could use it right now.